My name is Paul Hostetter, and I grew up in the Midwest where it's gray. And I used to think about California a lot growing up, and finally in the middle of college I took a year off and moved to San Francisco at the behest of another old friend from Michigan who had escaped and was living there. She just kept saying, "You gotta come out here." So I needed a break from school, so I came out and spent a year. And during that year I had a job and I had a little life going in San Francisco, but I eventually found that it was a city is a city is a city. So I used to borrow vehicles and just take rides to get out of town. So I'd take rides, and sometimes I'd go, I would get off work at 4 in the morning. I worked at the post office. I'd get off work at 4, so when it was still dark, I would drive until the sun came up, and then see where I was, check it out, drive back home, go to bed, start over. So I went to Mount Diablo and up into Napa and up the coast and down the coast, and the trips that I took that I always seemed to like the most were down the coast. And that's when I discovered Bonny Doon. This would have been 1967. No, you just drive and then you go to the beach and you look at the beach and that's nice. And well, what's up there? And you take a turn, you just go inland. Well, there aren't that many roads to take. And this is a long time ago, but I remember coming up and finding Martin Road and thinking that was pretty romantic, and all the redwoods, and ended up coming here quite a few times. And then I moved back to Detroit and I finished my degree, and I was living there kind of like waiting to see what happened next. And my girlfriend at the time got a job, she was a potter, got a job teaching one summer at Big Creek Pottery. And so she came out, did the job, met some people who said, "Hey, we have this big property with a bunch of houses on it. You want to live in one of those houses?" So she called me up in Detroit and said, "Do you want to check it out?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I came out, and that would have been the fall of '69, I think. Anyway, so the thing that compelled me the whole time I was back in Detroit in that period of time was realizing that I had grown up in a place where history is what happened to you. You never felt like you were really in charge of the world you were living in. You didn't have any way to affect it at all. There was just this juggernaut of history going on, and you could either accept it or not. But I always had the feeling that people out here had a more hands-on approach to guiding their destiny. And I thought about that, I read books, and I had friends who were living here. In my mind, this was a place where things you didn't have to be this passive citizen. You could actually do something. And I remember in that first fall that I came out to visit at Big Creek when my sweetie was working there, I met Bratton, and he was talking about, well, they're going to build a nuclear power plant in Davenport, and we can't have that, and da-da-da, and I thought, interesting, nobody in Michigan ever thought about that. There was a nuclear power plant, and it just went up, and everybody said, oh, there's a nuclear power plant. We later found out it had massive leaks all over Detroit then when I was growing up, and they'd never told anybody, of course. So I thought, this is interesting. So I kind of greeted my new environment here with the notion that something could actually be done about affecting where you lived and how things went there. And everyone I met somehow fed into that idea. And that was something I kind of appreciated. People come and go in Bonny Doon. It was a much smaller community when I moved here. People come and go. It was very underpopulated. I remember laying in the middle of Bonny Doon Road one night, several of us just laying literally on the pavement in the middle of the road and watching a complete eclipse of the moon, and not one car went by. I don't think that would happen today. And this was in Lower Bonny Doon Road at that. So we just sat for hours. We just laid in the middle of the road and watched the entire eclipse. It was a nice clear shot of the sky, and we just sat out there and stretched our bodies out on the pavement and watched this whole eclipse, which took quite a long time. Not one car. So that's different. There were still a lot of people that were the remnants of the people that had lived off the land here. There were still some of them around. It's not about individuals here. I mean, I could list a lot of really interesting people that I've met, and most of them aren't here anymore. There's a couple of people that I think were important who are still here, or at least still in the area. You know, Mary Rose Hellenthal, Mary Rose, umpteen different last names, who started the RBDA. Her sons were some of my first friends when I moved here, so I knew her right away. And she was an interesting gal. She was no longer living here. She was living over in Graham Hill at that point, but her kids were certainly Bonnie Doon residents, and the grandpa was still living in Martin. My other neighbors when I first moved here were Paige and Eloise Smith, who I got to know pretty quickly. They were really interesting characters, and I knew their kids, especially their son Elliot, who I picked up hitchhiking constantly. And they're just interesting people around, and they were kind of like not sitting back waiting to see what was going to happen next. They were making things happen, and that's something I've always appreciated about this community, Bonnie Doon and Santa Cruz in general. I mean, some of my earliest friends were the Lingamans up the drive. One of the first things I plugged into was that UC garden thing with Alan Chadwick. I was never a student there, but a lot of the people that I met here were, and they were really active in that, including Nancy and Marcia and Olivia Boyce, who lives down the road here. Those are all people that I met through that circumstance way back then. And that was an interesting thing, because that whole group of people has really taken on a life here in Santa Cruz. And all this organic gardening stuff, a lot of those people are old Chadwick people. And then there was this odd mixture as well of college professors. I mean, a lot of the early UC people staked out claims up here, being no dummies. Dean McHenry, who was my next door neighbor after Paige Smith when I moved up farther up Bonnie Doon Road. So there were people like Alan Brown still lived up here, the old Brown Bow Branch guy, who was born and raised in Bonnie Doon. Really this kind of courtly gentleman who was really fun to hang out with. So I had fun meeting new people, and most of the people that lived here lived in houses that had been here for a fairly long time. In other words, it was replacement people more than people buying property and building new houses. That seemed to take off more later in the 70s. It really kind of took off. And the fact, I suppose, that it didn't get stranger was because there was real zoning laws in effect that kind of guided how that development happened. A lot. I remember a long time ago taking an airplane ride in a small plane over Bonnie Doon and being surprised at how many people actually did live here. But if you drive the roads, you don't know that. You can't see them so much. And I kind of appreciate that, you know. I mean, there's obviously room for more people than I thought there was, but it didn't seem to, you know, affect my life terribly. So, well, the physical beauty of the place was initially what got me. You know, this little pocket here, which I see, I mean, if you just go straight up about a mile and you look back down, you can see, you know, there's San Francisco. There's this huge urban area, but yet we're not in it. I don't have to hear it. I don't have to smell it, you know. But if I want to go see a good movie or, you know, a play or an opera or whatever, it's really easy to get there. So I thought, this is an interesting place to live for a number of reasons. Somehow, I'm not one of these people that romanticizes the people here as much as some people like go off into this like, la, 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 you know. Bunch of individuals and there's no town center, et cetera, et cetera. It's not so important to me, you know. To me, it's a physical place and it's a community, you know, and everybody has different communities, you know. There's lots of people up here. All their community is their church. There's lots of those people here. Their community, you know, it overlaps with mine, but it's not the same one that I think of when I think of my community here. So, and I also have this 20/20 hindsight of having been here for so long that there's a lot of people that have come and gone. You know, like some of the early people. I used to fire pots and had a kiln and all of that stuff. And I did raku, which is sort of like a real hands-on physically active, kind of doing pottery. And Robert Heinlein loved to hang out with me. He'd come to help me do firings. He just thought this was really thrilling stuff. It's like completely different than what he did, which was sit in his office and write all day. So he'd come down and hang out and help me fire pots. It's named after a Robert Burns song. There was a guy named John Burns. He probably owned the timber rights, or at least exercised timber rights all over this hill. And he did live up here at some point. Nobody's quite sure where. But he was one of the real early guys. We're talking before the state of California had really exactly annexed this place or set up a county government or anything like that. Timber guy. His mill was in Ben Lomond. He also renamed Ben Lomond. It had a different name. He renamed Ben Lomond because he loved Robert Burns songs. He was Scottish. And Robert Burns was like the superstar of the 19th century. You know, anybody of Scottish descent, and even a lot of people who weren't, loved his songs. And so he named Ben Lomond and all these sort of Scottish names. "Ye Banks and Braes of Bonnie Doon" was another song, which I think is actually quite a nice song. But this house is an interesting house. This was owned by a family named Rocchi, R-O-C-C-H-I, one of the many Italian families that lived in Bonnie Doon that moved here in the post-Gold Rush era. A lot of Italians moved here because the land had all been logged off and it was sort of like clear and ready to go, and they went, woohoo, got those trees out of the way, let's plant some, you know, fruit trees and grapes and whatnot. So at some point they had 575 acres under cultivation around this house. And they had a big barn up where that Quonset hut is now. That burned down sometime during the war. So the Rocchi family had their big spread here, and of course as time went on and children would get married, they'd cut off a chunk for the daughter and her husband, etc. And the place got, you know, parceled out smaller and smaller pieces. His aunt was born in this house. She became his aunt by marrying his uncle and living on Back Ranch Road. So Kathy Rocchi is the one that I knew. She was born in this house in 1908. Her grandparents moved here in 1850, so there's some history in this joint. First few years I was here, my political stuff was all around Lighthouse Point, the power plant in Davenport, Wilder Ranch, but not so much up here. I was more involved with stuff that was down there that felt in a way more urgent. I mean, I got embroiled in that kind of stuff as soon as I moved here. And then eventually Bratton moved up here. Here we go for Bruce Bratton again, who was somebody that I'd met out at Big Creek a zillion years ago and had been, you know, active with to the extent that we were, you know, kind of on the same side of issues and working in little projects and signing petitions and, you know, stirring up trouble for whatever cause we thought needed to be stirred up. And he moved up to Bonnie Doon. And then he got involved in the RBDA, which I used to go to meetings, but I wasn't really a very active member or anything like that. And he just pleaded with, he says, "We really need you on the board." And I went, "Oh, how much time does it take?" You know, kind of pulled me in on that one. And I kind of rode that one, I think, for 11 or 12 years. Mostly what the RBDA did was sort of interface with county government. I mean, you know, if we could clarify such, sometimes we'd say, you know, they applied for a permit, there's nothing you can do. Or there is something you can do, here's what you got to do, go do it. And then sometimes, you know, we'd kind of write letters and get embroiled a little bit. Some of the bigger things, there was a trail thing that was supposed to be put in. I assume well-meaning person thought that they needed to have a public trail network all throughout Bonnie Doon. They had this idea. It was sort of like the Pacific Crest Trail, only like a junior version that was supposed to go all over the county, and it seemed like a good idea to somebody once upon a time, but when people finally found out that the plan existed, then something was actually happening, people got really upset about that one. So we had hearings about that. Mostly people came to meetings and they'd vent. And eventually that, I don't think it was a very good idea, and it did get scuttled. There was a community center thing, this whole park dedication funds, brouhaha. What else? Cement plant, big stuff with the cement plant because it's been not a great neighbor. And the goat ranch. Goat ranch was a big one for me. I had a lot to do with that one. So, and it took a long time, and finally it hit the wall and they moved. It's a fact that almost everybody in the world wants to live right next to the ocean. So there's huge population pressure in this area that we would never feel if we were like in, you know, Inyo County or something like that. It just wouldn't, we wouldn't have those pressures. So that's a fact. We have the university, which is kind of an untouchable mess. As the university expands, they're going to have more people in the community. There's no place to put them. The big one that nobody seems to want to talk about in any realistic way is water. There's not the water resources to support the number of people we've got currently. I mean, water tables are dropping. We don't have enough water. I started to touch on something earlier, which is about the people and how people come and go, but there's something about the place that stays the same, or we hope stays the same. I'm happy to have been part of some effort to kind of keep it the same. But I've been inspired by other people that have, like there's somebody that we know that bought a big piece of property that had been zoned for, I think, 5 or 10 acres. And he had it rezoned for 40 acres when he bought it. Just so when he sold these parcels, it wasn't going to fill up with people every 10 acres. I thought, well, that's brilliant. I thought that was an especially interesting thing to do. That was a long time ago. And you know what? It looks pretty nice over there. It stayed the same.